Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar about how to become self-employed in the UK. My name is Anastasia, and I'm here today with my colleague Kuldeep Clare, who is a senior solicitor at Sterling Law. Kuldeep has over 20 years experience in employment law, commercial contracts, and actually all aspects of the commercial law. And also with Luda, who is a founder of Sterling-Beanland. She is a chartered management accountant and a tax advisor. We'll be talking about, as I said, how to become self-employed in the UK. We'll be covering legal, accounting, and tax aspects. So, Kuldeep, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're all well. It's been a very bad week for the weather outside, but hope you're all well anyway, and nice and happy. We're going to be talking about the subject of employment. It's a very interesting time for the subject of employment. Well, it has been actually for the last over a year. Lots of things have been happening on the subject of employment, not least due to the lockdown, the furlough scheme. It's been a sad time for many people. People have been losing their jobs. The job situation has been changing. People's employment status has been changing. People have been furloughed, and lots of changes have occurred. And of course, we're here one day after some dramatic changes have occurred in the lockdown scheme, and things are looking a bit more positive now. So hopefully the economy is about to recover, and people are thinking of how they're going to be perhaps going back into work, maybe back into employment, back into new employment, and maybe starting up a new business, possibly. So it's a very interesting time, and things are perhaps looking up. So it's a good time to perhaps get some advice if you're thinking of doing that, perhaps starting up a new business, changing your employment status, and thinking about starting a new business. So we're here for you. We're here to help you and assist you in growing in whatever direction you want to grow. So whether I advise on both employment issues in relation to employment, and I deal with self-employment situations in terms of drafting commercial contracts. If you're in self-employment, which I can do. If you're thinking of setting up a business, or you are in business, I can draw up contracts with suppliers, or review contracts that you might have presented in front of you when you're dealing with suppliers or consumers. You might need a contract drawn up if you're dealing with consumers. I can deal with that. You might have disputes which you have with consumers if you're in business, and you might have disputes with suppliers. Lots of issues can arise, lots of legal issues can arise when you're in business. So if you're in self-employment, one of the things that you need to consider is obviously the issue of tax, and Luda will no doubt give her expert advice, particularly in relation to tax issues which arise in both self-employment and how that compares with employment. The situations are each very different, of course. One of the things to bear in mind if you're thinking of converting your status from self-employment from employment to self-employment is that you're taxed very differently. You won't have a lot of initial tax to pay, but it may landed with a huge tax bill later. But again, Luda will perhaps go into that in greater detail later. Will change. Your benefit entitlement will change as well. The way in which your mortgage interest is covered will change. If you've been on benefit maybe and you're going into self-employment, that may change as well. One important consideration if you're moving into self-employment from employment status is the question of insurance. When you're employed, your insurance, you don't need to worry too much about insurance because your employer covers your insurance. Your employer covers your insurance liability because everything that you do in the course of your employment is covered by your employer. When you are in business, you need to make sure that you're insured in respect of the liability, any liability that you may have, and that you have proper employer's liability insurance, and that has to be at least a bare minimum of 5 million. I can go into that if you seek a consultation with me. I don't want to bore you with the unnecessary detail here. You also need to have public liability insurance to cover liability to the public for things like personal injury claims if you're in business on your own. That's very important indeed. Otherwise, you could basically, to put it informally, have your pants sewed off by someone who suffers an injury as a result of something which you do unwittingly, not due greatly to your own fault, but possibly negligently, legally speaking, and that could be very may well be quite unfair. So you need to concern yourself with being insured properly. When you're self-employed, you need to keep accurate financial records, and that's very important indeed. The other very important consideration when you're deciding to become self-employed, and this is an important legal point, which is one of the first things which I would advise anyone setting up in business, and one of the things which I would advise them on is how you're going to set up your business. And this is a legal issue. There are basically three mechanisms. Firstly, you can be a sole trader if you're starting off relatively small. Secondly, you can be a partner if you're starting up with someone else. Thirdly, you can be a limited company. Lots of people, when they think of people who are trading in business, they only think of limited companies. They think, oh, I've got to set up a limited company. That's not necessarily true. You can set up as a sole trader. You don't have to set up as a limited company actually at all. There are certain advantages of setting up as a limited company, and that advantage comes with the name limited company. The reason why limited companies are called limited companies is because their liability for their financial liability, the financial liability of the people within that company who start up the company, is limited to a certain extent. So that's the basic advantage. But there are also certain disadvantages, such as the fact that everything that the company does is all in public, and it costs. There are certain costs associated with being a limited company as well. So the simplest way to trade is as a sole trader, or if you're a group, if you're setting up with a set of friends, you can be a partnership. And if you're setting up as a partnership, I can draw up a partnership agreement for you. It's very good. It's a very good idea to have a partnership agreement that's drawn up properly by a lawyer. Otherwise, you could find yourself in a lot of trouble. Your partnership could break up. You could have a falling out, and that could result in problems. So, if you're thinking of starting up a business, make sure that you have a good partnership agreement drawn up. If you're starting off by yourself, then you could find it okay to be a sole trader. That's fine. Those are the main issues, and of course, and moving on to employment-related issues, you may need to employ people when you're in business, and if you employ people, you may need to have employment contracts drawn up. I can do that for you. Draw up an employment contract for people that you employ. That's very important, particularly as employment law is moving forwards at a very fast rate. It's probably the fastest changing area of law at the moment. It's changing month by month. I was literally reading just yesterday on an employment law site on the subject of status of employment and how the latest case law has changed with regard to how status of employment, the law relating to status of employment has changed just yesterday. So it's changing all the time. So it's important to have employment contracts drawn up if you're employing people. It's important to ensure that you deal with employment disputes properly as well, and that you're advised in relation to disputes that may arise in the course of your business as well, because employment tribunal disputes can be quite costly. One of the reasons for that is that employees can bring disputes against businesses without too much of a risk, in the sense that you may end up paying for the costs of defending yourself without having them pay for the costs back, even though the claim may be absolutely worthless and nonsensical. That may seem harsh, and I've got nothing against employees, because actually I actually act for more employees than I act for employers. So I'm not on one side or the other. But that's the current situation, looking at it as fairly as possible. I'll hand over to Luda at the moment, and I'll come back later. Luda.
Thanks, Kuldeep.
Thank you very much, Kuldeep. Yeah. It's a pleasure to see everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. So effectively, we are talking about moving from employment to self-employment. First thing which I would always advise my clients to have a look whether you actually can be self-employed legally, whether that relationship which you, let's say, you would like to leave employment, it could be you actually former employer who is your client you would like to take, or it could be you finished your employment and you just got one client and one big client, and it looks like that one client will provide you if it wasn't for the relationship, it would have been employment, another employment. So do have a look, and there are different tests. There is one on HMRC employed self-employed toolkit, or you can obviously speak to me, Kuldeep, and we will advise you whether it is actually you can be self-employed or it is employment. There are a variety of tests such as who owns equipment, mutuality of obligation, master-slave relationship, payment of wages, financial risk, business organization, all these factors. And one of the most important one, Kuldeep would agree with me, is substitute. Okay, whether it is written in your contract that you can substitute and you actually have done it. So that means if you get sick or you go on a holiday, you can send someone else. That is one. So all these tests. So first of all, please do check that you actually, what you would like to be, you actually can be self-employed. If you are so you don't need actually to continue employment, whether for your former employer or for you found a client who looks like employer, but they want you to be self-employed. Okay, so talk to us if that might be the case. Now coming back, you want to set up, you want to have a few clients, you're fed up working for someone else, and you're thinking, okay, now company or self-employment. And where I would look at it, obviously there are cons and pros, and in both, one of the so now we are looking at it from the taxation point of view, where it is more tax efficient. More tax efficient, I would ask how much money you're going to make from the business. Effectively, what's your profit? Just to remind you, profit is sales minus cost of sales. That's the profit, the bottom figure. Is it going to be more than £50 or less than £50,000? And if it is less than £50,000, then I would recommend self-employment, generally speaking, just purely on the taxation and the cost-efficient way. If you're going to earn more than £50,000 in profit, then the most likely, the most appropriate form for you would be a company. The reason why, because the accountancy's fees, when you look at it, there is a massive difference between. So in order to save tax and justify accountancy fees and to have some a bit more, the company would only work when you earn more than £50,000 in profit. I would repeat that. So now let's talk about what's the difference? Sometimes the most cost-efficient way is not something that important would be to you, but to have a look, as Kuldeep said, the limitation limitation, liability limitation of the company, because there is a corporate veil which separates the directors from the company. Okay, and there is more protection for having a company rather than self-employed. It's you providing business individually, so you can be personally sued if something goes wrong. However, we tell our clients, take indemnity insurance, which could give just appropriate indemnity insurance, and that will cover the majority of the risk. Obviously, there is more risk being self-employed in any way than being but by having a company. So these two things take into account what is more important for you, and just for you to make a decision where you want to open a company or being a self-employed person. So now let's talk about taxes. What's the difference? So as being employed, you perhaps remember you were paying income tax. You had a personal allowance which is 12,570 now, and then you were having 20, 40, 45 these are band rates, right? So the good news as being self-employed, you're going to continue. So no changes here. As you were having personal allowance, if you were having, you're going to continue, and the income tax is the same, 20, 40, 45. The same tax bands up to 50,000 and 70, you're going to pay 20, your basic taxpayer, from 50, another 100,000, 40%, and if your income above 150,000 and 70, then it's 45. So absolutely same, no changes, which is good news. So that's familiar. Now, being an employee, you were paying 12%, okay, above what it used to be last year, 9,500. Now it's 9,588 this year, tax band a year. That's per annum. So anything above that, you were paying 12%, okay? That's pretty much it, okay? There were some benefit in kinds if you were to have, you were paying income tax, and your employer pay tax, but you wouldn't worry about it. So which would affect your personal allowance threshold. But generally speaking, that's pretty much all your taxes. Now, being a self-employed, it comes a little bit cheaper. First of all, you can claim your expenditure, okay? So, apologies, children from school. So, yes, so you can pretty much, it comes cheaper. First of all, you can claim expenses. If your employment, you can deduct subscription, perhaps to professional subscription, but generally that is about it. Maybe qualifying travel expenditure, maybe mileage was underpaid at a certain rate. Instead of paying 45p, you were paying less, so you can do that. But generally, there is a limitation how much you can claim being an employed. Being a self-employed, you can claim qualifying expenditure, such as, for example, qualifying travel expenditure, homeworking expenditure. Okay, so if you pay mortgage, you can, that percent of interest, we will talk how much you can claim. If you have water rates, electricity, gas, you can actually claim, and you remember you only pay tax on the profit element of it, which is fantastic. So you actually can claim some co-working expense. You can claim your mobile phone. Can you do it in employment? Pretty much no. Can you claim here? Yes, you can. You might need to apportion between personal and business calls, but you can claim your mobile, you can claim ink, stationery, printer, computer, iPad. Obviously, they have to be used for the business, okay? They have to be, the definition of expenses wholly and exclusively for the purpose of your business, okay? So now let's coming back. So now after all these deductions, you have it's called adjusted profit. Being a self-employed, I'm talking about. Now you take that profit, and income tax, as I just mentioned, will apply the same. Personal allowance, 20, 40, 45. Then there will be, instead of national insurance, which you will pay 12%, here you will be paying 9%. Right, so that's 3% cheaper. Fantastic, right? So that's our bonus. Apart from expenditure, so that's cheaper. And then, so that's class 4. That will go down. So 9% goes down to 2%, which is after the profits go beyond 50,000 and 70. Okay, so that's pretty much similar, because being an employed, you will pay 12%. Then it also goes down to 2% above 50 grand and a bit. Okay, so that's similar. But but initially, if you're basic taxpayer, you will be paying 3% cheaper, and you can deduct your expenditure. Okay, so that's pretty much taxes. Being a company, from another hand, just to give you a quick recap, because we don't have enough time to discuss company, you will be paying 19% corporate. You can also reduce your expenditure by qualifying expenses, then 19% corporation tax. Whatever remaining is, we will give you small salary, about £9,000. We wouldn't be paying tax at all on the salary, and then you can take profit by extracting dividends, which are 7.5% if you're basic taxpayer, 32.5% if you're high taxpayer, and additional 38.1%. But then we do it the tax planning. So that's pretty much shortly about the company. Now, let's talk about self-employed, as being self-employed. What is the process of registration? Remember, the tax year starts from 6th April 1 year and finishes 5th April of the other year. Then, for example, we are in tax year with you 21-22, okay? So that's called tax year 21-22, and that starts 6th April of 21 and finishes 5th April 22. We are going to talk about this tax period. If you started your business within this tax year, the registration actually is pretty relaxed. You're given plenty of time until next, the 5th October 2022. So remember, if you start business right now, you have up to next October. Okay, so we are now in tax year 2021. So you have up to October, not this year, but the next year, just to register for self-employed. What does registration really mean? That means you have to apply for your index tax reference, and there is specific form for applying, being registered as self-employed. You will receive in the post your index tax reference. Then what comes next? You have to file self-assessment return. What is self-assessment return? That is a declaration of personal taxes. That's where you will be showing, that's my turnover, that's my sales, these are my expenditure, and that's my profit. Normally, software calculates itself, you know what you owe, but obviously you can do it yourself, or you can hire us, and we can help you out to do it correctly, but that's pretty much. So now, when is exactly deadline? For the tax year 21-22, okay, the self-assessment is due 31st January 2023. So imagine, start business now, be in the tax year 2021-22, register by 5th October 2022 to do self-assessment return by the 31st January 2023. Plenty of time. By the time you pretty much figure out. But obviously, you want a professional help sort of as soon as possible. So I wouldn't suggest you wait until 5th October or 4th and say, actually, I need to register. So please do find out what's required. You have to, as Kuldeep mentioned, you have to have records. So you need to know you have to keep records for 6 years. If you lose a piece of paper, HMRC opens up inquiry, that's £3,000 fine. So you do want to keep the records. You need to have appropriate software, such as QuickBooks or Xero or Cashflow or Sage. There are plenty of them online. Some of them are free agent. I think some of them are free of charge. Okay. So that's pretty much, that's about taxes. I think I've covered and a bit of company and self-employed and what you need to move on, whether you actually can you be self-employed. That's I think here. So I think I pretty much outlined. So Kuldeep, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's it. That's more or less it on the subject of tax, etc., and finances. They're on the subject of differences between employment status. Yes, there are different tests which are used, different headings for tests, various tests which are used to determine whether someone is employed or self-employed. As I was saying, the law is changing very, very fast on whether what those tests are, how they're applied, and lots of people will be aware of the case involving Uber drivers. There have been other cases involving other kinds of workers in the so-called gig economy at the moment. The law is changing. And there have been proposals put forward in a report by a chap called Matthew Taylor on how employment law should be overhauled and simplified a lot more, so that at the moment what we have is a category called employees, self-employed, and in the middle we have a category of workers. And what is being proposed is the workers category should basically be abolished because it's in the middle, it's confusing, and the methods that you use to separate these categories is completely ambivalent. It's open to interpretation, and it just depends upon what judge you're before and how far time has elapsed, and what mood the judge is in as to how the decision goes, because rights are moving more and more in favour of employees at the moment. Some would say quite rightly, and I have some sympathy with that view actually, because many employees have been exploited by employers in the past. So the law is constantly changing. There are no hard and fast rules. There's no easy way in advance to figure out what category you'll necessarily fall in. So it's important to get expert advice where the situation may be a little bit more clear cut. It's not easy to give clear cut answers some of the time.
Absolutely.
Most of the time it is, but some of the time it isn't. So yes, it's a good idea always to get advice on whether in your situation, in the sort of work that you want to do, whether self-employed or employed may be best for you, particularly in the light of the new IR35 regulations which are being brought in. And it may well be that in the light, and we could do a whole video on IR35.
Yes, that's just ongoing. Yes.
Most people don't have a choice about whether they're employed or self-employed with the kind of work that they're doing. And the IR35 rules have been brought in for agency workers predominantly, or people who work in such as IR contractors under umbrella companies. Where sometimes the rules on self-employment have been abused, where they should really be classed as employees, and they've formed umbrella companies to class themselves as self-employed, and that they aren't really self-employed, and they use that to benefit themselves and avoid paying tax the way they should. Again, as I said, we could do a whole video on that. But if you're in the position of being a worker who is finding themselves in a difficult position because of IR35, then come to me for a consultation in detail. I've advised many contractors in detail on IR35, and we can perhaps give you some guidance. I can give you some guidance on that according to your peculiar circumstances. Everyone's circumstances are very different, and there's nothing that I can say in general which will help you, which are going to apply to everyone, because circumstances are all very different and they need to be looked at individually. But that's another issue in itself, as I've just said.
Absolutely. Before we perhaps, I'd like to give you interest in something. Well, that's all interesting, obviously. Some free cases. I've obviously we've had many cases like self-employed IR35 where I specifically was involved. So about 6 years ago, obviously, now it's very hot topic, employed, self-employed. About 6 years ago, there was still some. It just started coming to where they started being, systems started being abused. So I had a phone call. So I remember we gave an advert in Anglia. That's, I suppose, the only client I had. And eventually we actually started, still get in touch and so on and so forth. So you said, Luda, my husband, suddenly, he was happily employed. And suddenly the company made them partners. There is a must, and they provided a contract contract, and also they said they had like £30,000 contribution, and what is contribution? So I was like, okay, that was obviously just about. I was like, bring me the paperwork, and I looked at it. It was all fine, legally. But what effectively, obviously, after I'll tell you, they were caught and they had to repay everything. So what is that? Lots of employees, you remember this 3% difference, but it's 3% for taxpayer, but for the company itself, imagine they normally, when employer employs people, they pay 13.8% on the top of the salary. So obviously by shifting them being self-employed, they're saving effectively plus 3% on the pension cost, so 60.8% for each employee. That's a lot of money, imagine. So why not to make them partners? And partners, they are treated as self-employed, sole traders. Effectively, the same thing. Partnership don't pay taxes, but shares basically of profit goes to the partners. So obviously, if they decided to take advantage of the system and say, well, now you're a sole trader, they said to all their workers. So they came to me and said, listen, it looks like some kind of system, and they had very top tax advisors advising them on that. I was like, well, that looks dodgy. You need to raise that question, raise that. By the time he was raising the question, obviously he couldn't figure out that I was dealing, helping him out. Otherwise, he would be sacked straight away. So HMRC opened up inquiry. And then he said to me, look, I'll leave it. If I ask one more question, they will just sack me. I said, okay, it's up to you, but it looks dodgy. There is actually a legislation disguised, enumeration, and that comes under this legislation, and that contribution, they're just making it up to, but they're saying you can vote. So there is anti-avoidance, lots of anti-avoidance. So eventually in a year time, HMRC opened up inquiry, he comes to me again. So obviously we have to work, as it asks this, and luckily his employer agreed to with the HMRC some kind of deal, paid penalties, and so he at that point, about that 5 years ago now, he became an employee again. But company, they had to shut down the company, agreed the deal, so it went through a whole lot of trouble. So just to let you know, so the other one, interestingly enough, was also someone, I wouldn't obviously say the name. She said, Luda, so I provided tax advice. Should I, it's typical, actually, the reason why I say the example, it's typical. So I've got a job somewhere in Russia or in Kazakhstan, say, and freelancer. Can I be freelancer? And obviously it's cheaper. I don't want to pay, 3 more %. And so I had to provide tax consultation. And I highlighted all the risk having one client, ticking up all the boxes, being an employee, salary the same of the month, who gets paid at the end of the month? Employee. So fixed from 9 until 5, master-slave relationship. They were providing the computer, they were providing the phone, having an email address, being part and parcel of organization. Clearly employee. So I said, listen, if you still want to be a freelancer, you need to understand we can help you, but you are risky. So HMRC, and earlier or later, they will come. It's just a matter of time. And the longer you leave it, so effectively, lady, obviously, she came to me with an idea of being self-employed. After the consultation, she said, thank you very much. That's pretty scary stuff. I'm going, to register that foreign company with your help as employer, and I will pay taxes as an employee, and they will have to pay. The advantage of that, having a holiday, getting sick pay, even as it is SSP, that's still, and have some rights. After 2 years, Kuldip is a pro. After 2 years, you get certain rights, not being sucked unfairly and so on. So that's advantage of being employed. So that's a second. And the third one, yes, I've got a Scottish guy coming to me, company. Now, company IR 45, school just said you can talk about for a whole day, but one example said, Luda, so what is the best? I've got one company, they forced me to open up a company. So they said the only way they can deal with me is a company. So obviously I can't tell him, you need to go and argue. I could say, because you are an employee clearly, so go and argue, tell them they'll say, Luda, if I tell him, I'll lose the job. So there are practical things here. They force our client to have a company. There is no way out. He said, whether you have a company or that is a goodbye. So I said, okay, so now you have to have a company, no props. He opened up in Scotland himself a company, and now we have to do payroll. Then we say to him, listen, there are also risks. That's, provision substitute. And it was again salary, the same salary in the end of the month, 9 till 5, master-slave relationship, having an email of the company, part and parcel of organization, managing staff, clearly in play. So listen, you're caught under rules, what they're called IR 35. You can Google, guys, if you're interested. And we say the only way around it, we just produce calculation. As all the money you get, you've got nice 5% deduction because there is calculation. You give 5% admin fee reduction, and you can, if you got travel expenses qualifying, you can actually deduct there, and so. Subscriptions as well. So there is a deemed, what it's called deemed earnings. So we take, and we said there is a way around it. We just tax your pay as it is employment, and that's how you get around it, by ticking up the box what you're supposed to be. He heard our advice, he took it, and now we do calculation for him IR 35. So he doesn't, though he is covered, he's put up on the IR 35 rules, but considering that we actually tick the boxes, and he pays enough tax to HMRC is happy. So these are three cases I wanted to share with you. Thank you for that.